in the far reaches of the galaxy. Far beyond the familiar stars and planets that humanity had explored for centuries, there existed countless worlds, each unique in its environment, culture, and life. Among these countless civilizations, some were peaceful and technological, some primitive but resourceful, and some so dangerous that even the bravest of explorers avoided them. One of the most notorious and fascinating species in this galaxy were the Death. To an outsider, their name alone evoked fear and caution. Many who heard of them imagined monstrous beings with unimaginable strength and cruelty. Stories of their exploits spread across star systems, stories of survival against impossible odds, of warriors who thrived where most would perish. But those who truly knew the Deathworlders understood that these creatures were not merely savage fighters. They were disciplined, intelligent, and bound by a strict code of honor. Their society revolved around survival, training, and loyalty, and anyone who had the privilege or misfortune of encountering them quickly realized that under their intimidating exterior lay a profound sense of responsibility toward allies and those in need. For centuries, humans had observed the Deathworlders from afar, unsure whether to trust them or fear them. The Deathworlders themselves rarely interfered in galactic affairs unless the situation was dire or they were personally invested. They did not seek glory, wealth, or political power. Instead, their actions were guided by a mixture of necessity, loyalty, and a deep understanding of life in extreme conditions. To survive on their home planet, which was one of the most dangerous and unforgiving worlds in the galaxy, they had to develop skills and instincts that far surpassed those of ordinary beings. They had to learn to read environments, anticipate threats, and react with split-second precision. Every member of their society underwent intense training from a young age, honing not just physical prowess but also mental acuity and strategic thinking. By the time they ventured into space, they were already among the most capable beings in the galaxy, fully prepared to face challenges that would leave most species helpless. It was in this context, during a time when the galaxy was relatively peaceful but fraught with quiet tensions, that the Deathworlders first became aware of a distress signal unlike any they had encountered before. The signal came from a remote alien colony on the edge of known space. The colonists belonged to a species that was gentle, technologically advanced, and unprepared for violent conflict. They were scholars, scientists, and engineers, focused on knowledge and exploration rather than war or combat. Their planet was a beautiful but isolated world, with harsh environmental conditions that made it difficult for outsiders to reach them quickly. The distress signal they sent was urgent, repetitive, and filled with fear. It described a situation of imminent danger, of lives at stake, and of forces threatening to destroy everything the colonists had built. It was a cry for help in its purest form, a signal that demanded immediate attention and action. When the Deathworlders intercepted this signal, there was no hesitation. For them, ignoring a call for help was not an option. It was part of their code and unspoken rule that those who were capable of aiding others had a duty to do so. Their leaders convened swiftly, analyzing the signal, assessing the risks, and deciding on a course of action. The mission would be perilous. The planet was surrounded by hazardous environments. The hostile forces were unknown but likely formidable, and the journey itself would test the limits of any rescue operation. Yet, for the Deathworlders, these were not deterrents but challenges to be met with skill, precision, and courage. They assembled a team of their best operatives, individuals who had survived training and trials that would have broken lesser beings. Each member brought unique skills: combat expertise, tactical intelligence, environmental survival, and medical knowledge. Together, they formed a unit capable of executing missions that most species would consider suicidal. As preparations began, the Deathworlders reviewed every detail available about the alien colony and the surrounding region. They studied maps, historical records, and environmental data, seeking to understand not only the physical terrain but also the cultural and social dynamics of the colonists. Unlike most rescue missions, this was not merely a matter of brute force. The Deathworlders valued intelligence, empathy, and strategy. They knew that the success of the mission depended as much on understanding the alien civilization as it did on overpowering any threats. The colonists' vulnerabilities were apparent. They were untrained in combat, unfamiliar with the dangers of their planet, and reliant on technology that could be sabotaged or destroyed. The Deathworlders' approach would have to be precise, measured, and adaptive. Every move would be scrutinized, every potential outcome considered. Meanwhile, back on the alien colony, fear and uncertainty had begun to take hold. The colonists had never faced a true threat to their survival, and the sudden arrival of danger shook their society to its core. Panic was widespread, and communication was strained as they attempted to coordinate their defenses and seek assistance. They had hoped that someone, anyone, might respond to their distress signal, but the reality of their isolation made hope fragile. When the first signs of the Deathworlders' intervention appeared through distant reconnaissance probes and signal confirmations, the colonists were unsure whether to feel relief or fear. The Deathworlders were feared across the galaxy, and their appearance often signaled not salvation but judgment, conquest, or danger. It was only when the operatives began to communicate and coordinate with the colonists that trust began to take root. albeit cautiously. The Deathworlders were methodical, patient, and observant, taking the time to assess the colonists' needs and to establish a plan that would maximize the chances of success while minimizing unnecessary risk. At the same time, the galaxy watched. News of the distress signal and the Deathworlders' mobilization spread quietly among other civilizations. Some were curious, others anxious, and a few skeptical. Could the Deathworlders succeed where others might fail? Would their intervention escalate conflicts, or would it bring a solution? Across star systems, debates emerged about the role of such powerful beings in conflicts that were not their own, and whether intervention was ethical, necessary, or dangerous. But the Deathworlders themselves were unmoved by speculation or opinion. Their focus remained singular: to reach the colony, to assess the threat, and to protect life whenever possible. Their reputation, their skills, and their discipline all converged in this one defining moment. It was a mission that tested the very essence of their society and the principles they had long upheld. As the Deathworlders prepared for departure, there was a quiet intensity among the team. Equipment was checked, strategies reviewed, and contingencies planned for every conceivable scenario. They understood that failure could mean the end of the colony, the loss of innocent lives, and potentially even their own demise. Yet there was no hesitation, no wavering. Their training had forged in them a mindset that embraced danger as a natural part of existence. Each operative carried not only physical tools but also an unwavering commitment to their mission, a dedication to the lives they would protect, and a recognition that inaction was never an option. For the Deathworlders, this was not simply a rescue mission, it was a testament to their values, a demonstration of their courage, and a reflection of the deep connection they maintained with life, even beyond their own species. The departure itself was a spectacle of precision and resolve. As their ships left their homeworld and navigated the vast expanse of space, the Deathworlders maintained a disciplined formation, scanning the void for threats, hazards, and opportunities. They shared minimal words, relying on coordinated signals, practiced routines, and instinct honed over decades. The silence among them was not emptiness but focus, a shared understanding that every action, every decision, could determine the outcome of the mission. In this quiet determination lay the true essence of the Deathworlders, a species feared for their strength but respected for their honor, capable of facing the unknown with clarity, skill, and purpose. By the time they approached the vicinity of the alien colony, the Deathworlders had already become a symbol of hope for the frightened colonists. Though the situation was far from resolved, their presence alone changed the dynamics of the crisis. The operatives were ready to confront environmental dangers, hostile forces, and the unknown challenges of a planet few had survived. And yet, beneath their disciplined exterior, there was an understanding of the gravity of what lay ahead. Every life they would save, every decision they would make, and every risk they would take would contribute not just to the survival of the colony, but to the reinforcement of a principle the Deathworlders had always embodied, that strength without a know was meaningless, and courage without purpose was hollow. The alien colony lay on a remote planet at the edge of known space, a world untouched by most civilizations. Its landscape was a strange combination of jagged cliffs, deep canyons, and sprawling plains covered with unusual bioluminescent vegetation. Rivers of thick, metallic-looking liquid twisted through valleys, reflecting the alien sky above in a dim, eerie shimmer. The air was breathable but carried a faint, strange centane, unfamiliar mixture of minerals and gases that could irritate untrained lungs. Despite the planet's natural beauty, it was harsh, unforgiving, and full of hidden dangers. For the colonists, however, this world was home. They had built their settlements carefully, creating protective domes and advanced shelters that allowed them to thrive in a place that might otherwise have seemed impossible for any intelligent life. Their society was driven by curiosity and learning. They spent their days studying the planet's unusual ecosystems, developing technology to survive and communicate across the harsh terrain, and working to build a community that was sustainable and peaceful. They were brilliant in many ways but naive in matters of danger and defense. The early signs of trouble began quietly, almost imperceptibly at first. Strange, sporadic tremors shook the ground beneath the colony's foundations. Minor power disruptions occurred, interrupting the delicate balance of their life support systems. Small groups of colonists reported glimpses of unfamiliar figures moving at the edge of the settlements, shadows that seemed almost too large to be natural creatures, moving with an intelligence that hinted at malicious intent. At first, the colonists dismissed these occurrences as environmental anomalies or glitches in their monitoring equipment. After all, this planet was new to them, and unexpected natural phenomena were common. But soon, the signs could no longer be ignored. Systems began failing more frequently, and reports of missing resources and damaged equipment became alarmingly regular. The sense of unease grew. Fear, a feeling largely foreign to a species that had rarely faced real danger, started to creep into daily life. The first confrontation came in the form of a raid. Small, coordinated groups of attackers struck the outer settlements at night, targeting energy sources, storage units, and communication arrays. They were fast, precise, and completely unknown to the colonists. who had never experienced anything remotely resembling an organized attack. Panic spread quickly. The colonists scrambled to defend themselves, using their limited weapons and security measures, but they were untrained in combat and unprepared for strategic warfare. Their defenses, designed to protect against environmental hazards rather than intelligent hostile beings, were inadequate. It became painfully clear that this was not a random event or an environmental threat. It was a deliberate attempt to weaken, intimidate, and perhaps even eliminate the colony. That as the situation escalated, the colonists tried to reach out for help, sending distress signals across the galaxy. Their communications were carefully encrypted and repeated, knowing that delay or failure could cost them everything. The distress signals described the dire situation in detail, pleading for any capable civilization to respond quickly. It was a call for intervention that carried the weight of desperation and urgency. Meanwhile, inside the colony, the leaders faced impossible decisions. They had to allocate scarce resources between protecting the population and maintaining essential systems. Every choice involved risk. Every delay could mean casualties. Fear mingled with determination as they realized the gravity of their circumstances. Inexperienced in handling such crises, they relied on coordination, quick thinking, and hope that someone, somewhere, would answer their plea. Despite the growing chaos, the colonists' resolve did not waver entirely. They were clever, adaptable, and resourceful in ways that were unconventional. Small teams began scouting the outskirts of the colony, attempting to understand the attackers' methods and patterns. Some studied the terrain for potential defensive advantages, while others worked to repair damaged systems and maintain life support functions. Even in the face of fear, these actions reflected their dedication to survival and the protection of their community. Yet, every step forward was met with uncertainty. The attackers were unpredictable and highly skilled, leaving little room for mistakes. The colonists began to recognize that conventional approaches to defense would be insufficient. Their ingenuity, though remarkable, had limits, and the realization that outside help was essential became undeniable. In the midst of this turmoil, tensions among the colonists themselves began to rise. Differing opinions on strategy, the allocation of resources, and who should take the most dangerous tasks led to arguments and divisions. Some called for immediate retreat to safer areas, believing that survival depended on fleeing rather than fighting. Others insisted on standing their ground, arguing that abandoning their settlements and research would be tantamount to surrender. The debates were heated, emotional, and fueled by the fear that any wrong decision could result in disaster. These internal conflicts reflected not only the stress of the external threat but also the colonists' lack of experience with such high-stakes situations. It became increasingly clear that, while they were brilliant in science and technology, their vulnerability lay in their inexperience with survival under direct and intentional threat. The attackers, whatever their nature, seemed to understand the colonists' weaknesses. They struck with precision, avoiding unnecessary confrontation but targeting critical infrastructure. Communication lines were disrupted, power grids sabotaged, and transport systems damaged. Every attack created ripple effects, straining the colony's ability to coordinate a defense. Colonists worked tirelessly to repair the damage, often putting themselves at risk in the process. Small teams risked venturing into exposed areas to recover vital equipment or secure compromised zones, fully aware that the attackers could be lying in wait. Each mission was tense, dangerous, and mentally exhausting. Fatigue, fear, and uncertainty weighed heavily on the population. Threatening to break morale in response to these ongoing threats, the colony began to take more organized defensive measures. They set up patrols, reinforced vulnerable areas, and created early warning systems designed to detect intrusions. While these measures were helpful, they were ultimately reactive rather than proactive. The colonists were constantly adapting to the attackers' unpredictable strategies rather than controlling the situation themselves. Every victory was temporary, every repair fragile, and every sense of security fleeting. They were caught in a cycle of survival, reacting to threats rather than eliminating them. It was in this environment of constant danger, stress, and uncertainty that hope for external intervention became increasingly critical. Amid the mounting danger, the Deathworlders' arrival was the beacon of hope the colony desperately needed. Yet, even before their presence was confirmed, the colonists' imagination ran wild with possibilities. Rumors circulated about powerful warriors capable of facing any danger, creatures who could survive conditions that would kill ordinary beings. Some feared that if the Deathworlders intervened, the attackers would respond with even greater force, escalating the situation further. Others clung to the idea that these legendary beings would be their salvation, capable of turning the tide in ways the colonists could not even comprehend. The uncertainty added yet another layer of tension to an already precarious situation. During these early stages of the crisis, daily life in the colony became a balance between survival and maintaining routine. Colonists continued to perform essential tasks, study the planet's resources, and care for one another, all while preparing for potential attacks. Children were kept indoors or closely monitored, and vulnerable community members were moved to the most secure areas. The society adapted quickly to the constant stress, developing new schedules, communication protocols, and emergency routines. Despite the fear and chaos, the colonists' determination to preserve their way of life shone through. Their spirit and resilience were remarkable, even in the face of what seemed like insurmountable odds. At the same time, there were small moments of humanity, courage, and connection that reminded everyone why the colony existed in the first place. Colonists shared stories of hope and ingenuity, comforted one another during long nights, and offered reassurance to those who felt overwhelmed by the constant danger. Even simple acts, like helping repair a damaged shelter or providing food to someone stranded by a power outage, carried profound meaning. These small acts of solidarity strengthened the community and reinforced the belief that, together, they could survive until help arrived. As the days passed, it became increasingly clear that the attackers were not just opportunistic predators. They were organized, intelligent, and strategically minded. Their tactics evolved in response to the colony's defensive measures, demonstrating adaptability and foresight. This realization added a sense of urgency to the colonists' situation. They were no longer facing random danger but a calculated threat aimed at breaking their society and dismantling their infrastructure. The stakes were higher than ever. Failure to respond effectively could mean not just temporary setbacks, but the total collapse of the colony and the loss of countless lives. It was in this tense, precarious situation that the first signs of external intervention were detected. Distant signals, initially faint and difficult to distinguish from the background noise of the planet's natural electromagnetic activity, suggested the approach of an advanced, highly capable force. The colonists watched with a mix of hope and apprehension, unsure whether these new arrivals would bring salvation or further danger. They could only wait, prepare as best they could, and hope that the legendary beings they had heard about, the Deathworlders, would live up to their reputation. The alien colony demonstrated both the fragility and resilience of life under extreme pressure. Vulnerable and inexperienced, yet resourceful and determined, they faced threats that tested every aspect of their society. Fear, uncertainty, and internal conflict were constant companions, but so were courage, ingenuity, and hope. Every day was a struggle to survive, every decision a potential turning point, and through it all, the colony waited, holding on to the belief that help would come, that their cries would be answered, and that they might yet endure the challenges of a planet that seemed intent on testing their very existence. As the alien colony struggled to maintain its fragile existence amid the increasing attacks, the situation quickly escalated into a full-blown crisis. The attackers, who at first appeared sporadically and unpredictably, now operated with coordination and strategy. It became clear that this was not a random assault or a minor threat, but a calculated effort to destabilize and dominate the colony. The once peaceful world that the colonists had called home now felt like a battlefield, where every movement carried risk and every decision could mean the difference between survival and catastrophe. Fear and tension gripped the population, and the thin line between order and chaos seemed to grow thinner with each passing day. The first sign that the conflict was escalating came when supply lines were disrupted on a massive scale. The colonists relied heavily on automated transport systems and drones to move food, medicine, and energy supplies between the outer settlements and the central hub. For a time, these systems had allowed them to maintain a semblance of normal life, even under pressure. But now, the attackers targeted these supply lines directly, sabotaging drones, destroying transport vehicles, and cutting communication cables. The result was immediate. Settlements began running low on essential resources. Panic spread among residents, and morale began to erode. Families huddled in their shelters, rationing supplies while the colony's engineers worked tirelessly to repair the damage. Knowing full well that the attackers were likely observing and adapting to every action, the attackers were not just effective, they were intelligent. They studied the colony's patterns, learned from previous failed attempts to strike, and refined their strategies with each encounter. Patrol routes were anticipated and countered, repair teams were ambushed, and even minor movements within the settlements were monitored. Every day, the colonists realized more clearly that they were dealing with an enemy who was as cunning as it was dangerous. This level of strategic planning was something they had never faced before. The alien colony had been used to dealing with environmental hazards, technological malfunctions, and even minor conflicts with local wildlife, but never an intelligent force that could plan and predict in such a calculated way. Meanwhile, within the colony, tension rose not only because of external threats but also because of internal pressures. Leaders struggled to maintain order, assign responsibilities, and enforce discipline. Arguments broke out over priorities. Some argued that certain settlements should be abandoned to protect more densely populated areas, while others insisted on defending every part of the colony, no matter the cost. Emotional stress ran high, and even the most rational minds were challenged by fear and uncertainty. Families worried about the safety of loved ones assigned to high-risk areas. Engineers and scientists, who had devoted their lives to studying the planet and building sustainable systems, now had to risk their lives repairing damage under dangerous conditions. Each task, each decision, felt like walking a tightrope over a chasm, where a single misstep could lead to disaster. Compounding the difficulty was the unpredictable nature of the planet itself. The environment, already harsh, seemed to conspire with the attackers. Violent storms struck without warning, flooding valleys and making movement across the terrain treacherous. Landslides and rockfalls blocked vital pathways, and strange, aggressive wildlife became more frequent near the settlements, likely driven closer by the chaos and destruction. Even if the colonists had wanted to retreat or regroup, the landscape often made such strategies impossible. Their very survival depended on navigating a hostile world while simultaneously fending off intelligent and adaptive enemies. Every day presented a new obstacle, a new challenge, and a new test of both ingenuity and courage. The attackers' psychological tactics further intensified the conflict. They began targeting not only the colony's infrastructure but also the morale of its people. Signals were intercepted and manipulated, false messages were sent to sow confusion, and the visibility of destruction in key areas was meant to instill fear and helplessness. For a species unaccustomed to warfare, these attacks were terrifying. Panic spread like wildfire, and it became clear that maintaining the psychological resilience of the population would be as important as repairing physical damage. Community leaders and volunteers worked tirelessly to reassure the colonists, reminding them of their collective strength and ingenuity. But the stress was relentless. Fear had become a constant companion, shadowing every step and clouding every decision at this stage. Small pockets of resistance emerged, driven by the colonists' determination to protect their home. Young engineers rigged improvised defense systems, using scavenged materials to create barriers and alarm systems. Scientists experimented with modifying their technology to create non-lethal deterrents, hoping to slow down the attackers and buy time. Civilians volunteered to patrol exposed areas, gather intelligence, and assist in repairs, even when doing so meant putting themselves directly in harm's way. These efforts reflected the remarkable adaptability of the colonists, their willingness to innovate under pressure, and their desire to take control of their situation, even when the odds seemed stacked against them. Yet, despite their resourcefulness, it became increasingly evident that their efforts were only slowing the inevitable rather than preventing it. The attackers were relentless and increasingly aggressive, adapting to every defense, and pushing the colony closer to the brink of disaster. As the attacks continued, the threat to the colony's leadership became evident. Those responsible for coordinating defense, repairs, and communication found themselves under direct assault. Ambushes targeted individuals responsible for critical infrastructure and decision-making, aiming to disrupt command and create chaos. For the first time, the colonists began to understand that their attackers were not just seeking resources, they wanted to dismantle their society, break their organization, and leave them vulnerable. Leadership meetings became tense, filled with debate, fear, and strategic planning. Every decision carried significant weight, and the margin for error was razor. Leaders had to balance risk with necessity, ensuring that each step forward would not result in catastrophic loss while still taking action to protect the Inspace population. In the midst of these challenges, the colony's communication systems became critical lifelines. Attempts were made to reach out beyond the planet, sending encrypted distress signals repeatedly in the hope that anyone would respond. The urgency of these signals increased as attacks intensified, and the desperation of the colonists became palpable. Messages described the situation in detail, the attackers' methods, the damage inflicted, the suffering of the population, and the dire need for immediate assistance. Yet, the response remained uncertain. The vastness of space, the isolation of their location, and the potential risks for anyone attempting to intervene meant that help was not guaranteed. This uncertainty added yet another layer of stress to the colonists, who had to continue surviving while waiting for a response that might or might not come. Amidst all this chaos, the Deathworlders were already on their way. Their presence, though not yet fully confirmed to the colonists, became a symbol of hope, sparking cautious optimism and renewed determination. Rumors spread of a highly skilled and disciplined force capable of facing any danger and overcoming the most extreme conditions. Stories of their courage, strategy, and survival expertise were told among the colonists, offering inspiration and a sense of reassurance in the face of fear. Even though the colony remained under severe threat, the knowledge that capable allies might soon intervene strengthened the resolve of both leaders and civilians. Despite the looming hope, the rising conflict continued to escalate. Every day brought new attacks, more destruction, and greater complexity. The attackers were no longer merely testing the colony's defenses, they were actively seeking to overwhelm and dominate them. The colonists' daily lives were now defined by survival, constant vigilance, strategic adaptation, and the relentless effort to maintain essential systems under pressure. Fear, exhaustion, and stress were constant companions, yet so too were courage, ingenuity, and solidarity. The colonists discovered strengths within themselves that they had never known, but they also faced the stark reality that alone, their survival was uncertain. This stage of rising conflict marked the turning point where the alien colony realized that their ingenuity and resourcefulness, while remarkable, could only go so far. They were brilliant thinkers, skilled engineers, and resilient individuals, But against a relentless, intelligent, and adaptive enemy, they needed more than determination, they needed help. Every day of struggle underscored the limits of what they could accomplish on their own, while also highlighting their courage, community spirit, and unwavering commitment to survival. The challenges they faced were enormous, and the danger grew with each passing hour. Yet, through it all, the colonists' hope for rescue, combined with their own perseverance, set the stage for the arrival of the Deathworlders, the only force capable of turning the tide in this desperate and escalating conflict. The colony was a tense, fragile society under immense pressure. The attackers had revealed their full capabilities and the seriousness of the threat. Internal debates, resource scarcity, environmental hazards, and constant fear had pushed the colonists to their limits. Yet their courage and determination had not faltered completely. In the midst of rising conflict, the foundation for an extraordinary rescue was being laid, a moment where skill, hope, and the arrival of formidable allies would come together to challenge the forces threatening to destroy everything the colony had built. The alien colony, already stretched to its limits, had reached a point where survival was no longer just a matter of endurance, it was a race against time, strategy, and sheer force. What had begun as sporadic attacks had now transformed into a relentless siege, testing the colonists in ways they had never imagined. The once orderly, productive society had been reduced to a community on constant alert, with every action carefully weighed against potential disaster. Sleep was short, decisions were made under stress, and every day seemed to bring new crises that threatened to unravel the delicate balance the colony had fought so hard to maintain. The fear of total collapse loomed like a shadow over every settlement, leaving the colonists in a state of tense anticipation, uncertain of when or if their desperate struggle would end. The attackers, who had so far demonstrated remarkable cunning and adaptability, escalated their campaign with devastating efficiency. They were no longer content with mere sabotage of infrastructure or sporadic raids. They began coordinated strikes aimed directly at the heart of the colony, targeting critical facilities, communication hubs, and supply centers simultaneously. These attacks were precise, indicating a level of intelligence and strategy that far exceeded the colonists' expectations. For the first time, it became clear that the enemy was not only capable but determined to wipe out the colony entirely. Panic swept through the population as reports of multiple settlements under siege came in almost simultaneously. The sense of being outnumbered and outmaneuvered was overwhelming. Even the most experienced leaders struggled to coordinate defenses, knowing that one wrong move could result in catastrophic loss of life. As the intensity of the attacks increased, so too did the danger to individual colonists. Families were forced to take shelter in cramped, reinforced zones, while volunteers and defense teams worked tirelessly to repair damage and repel intruders. The risk was immense. A single encounter with the attackers could mean injury or death. Yet the colonists had little choice but to confront the danger head. Small squads ventured into exposed areas to repair power grids, restore communication arrays, or retrieve essential resources. Each mission was tense and dangerous, as the attackers had now anticipated many of their movements. Ambushes were common, traps were set in predictable paths, and every encounter required both courage and quick thinking. The once safe environment of the colony had transformed into a lethal landscape where survival depended on vigilance, strategy, and sometimes sheer luck. The breaking point approached as the attackers shifted their focus to capturing colonists directly. Kidnappings were no longer random. They were tactical moves aimed at demoralizing the population and destabilizing the colony's organization. Key individuals, including engineers, scientists, and community leaders, were taken during night raids, leaving gaps in the colony's defenses and operations. Panic intensified, and the remaining colonists were faced with impossible choices. Should they attempt rescue operations, risking more lives, or focus on protecting the majority? The moral and strategic dilemmas were agonizing, highlighting the limits of their knowledge, experience, and capacity to respond. Every decision carried weighty consequences, and the pressure threatened to break even the strongest members of the community. In response to these escalating threats, internal conflicts within the colony intensified. Disagreements erupted over how to allocate scarce resources and whether to risk sending small teams to rescue captives or consolidate efforts in safer zones. Arguments were fierce, fueled by fear, exhaustion, and frustration. Emotional strain affected judgment, and even rational leaders struggled to balance the immediate need for action with the long-term survival of the colony. The breaking point was not only external but internal. The unity and morale of the colonists were being tested as much as their physical survival. Trust became fragile, and tension ran high in leadership meetings, where every strategy was debated under the weight of imminent danger. At the same time, the environmental hazards of the planet compounded the crisis. Sudden storms erupted with devastating force, flooding pathways and damaging shelters. Landslides buried critical supply routes, cutting off access to essential resources. Unpredictable wildlife, emboldened or displaced by the attacks and environmental disturbances, became increasingly aggressive, attacking settlements and making travel between zones even more perilous. These natural threats were constant reminders that the colony faced challenges on multiple fronts. The colonists' ingenuity and adaptability were pushed to the absolute limit, as they had to confront both intelligent enemies and a hostile world simultaneously. Every step required planning, coordination, and courage. As the breaking point neared, the colony's leadership realized that survival required extraordinary measures. Standard defensive protocols were insufficient against an enemy that could adapt and outmaneuver them at every turn. Emergency strategies were implemented, including evacuation of vulnerable zones, formation of rapid response teams, and coordinated efforts to protect critical infrastructure. Volunteers took on risky missions to repair energy grids, reinforce shelters, and maintain communication lines. Each action was a gamble, each success a temporary reprieve, and each failure a potential disaster. The colony was now functioning in a state of constant crisis management, with no room for error and no guarantee of safety. Amid this chaos, the psychological strain on the colonists became severe. Constant fear, uncertainty, and exhaustion began to wear on their mental health. Individuals who had once been confident and decisive found themselves paralyzed by anxiety. Families worried incessantly about the safety of loved ones who were involved in dangerous repair or defense operations. Children were shielded from direct danger but still sensed tension and fear in the adults around them. The breaking point was as much a test of mental resilience as it was of physical endurance. Every colonist faced the challenge of maintaining composure, making decisions under pressure, and supporting one another despite the overwhelming odds. During this critical period, the Deathworlders' presence became increasingly vital. The colonists, desperate for intervention, monitored distant signals for any sign of their arrival. Stories of the Deathworlders' legendary abilities had spread across the galaxy, and hope that these formidable beings could arrive in time became a crucial psychological anchor. Even without physical presence, the knowledge that potential saviors were en route offered some relief and a renewed sense of purpose. The colonists began coordinating their remaining resources and defenses with the expectation that skilled allies would soon assist them. This hope, however fragile, was enough to prevent complete collapse, giving the community the mental strength to continue resisting the relentless pressure of the attackers. The attackers, aware of the colony's anticipation of reinforcements, began to intensify their tactics even further. Their goals shifted from simple domination to psychological warfare, aiming to break the spirit of the colonists before external help could arrive. They staged false evacuations, manipulated communications, and created scenarios designed to incite panic and mistrust. These tactics tested not only the colony's defensive capabilities but also the cohesion of its people. It was a battle of both mind and body, with survival hinging on strategy, courage, and the ability to remain calm under immense pressure. The breaking point was no longer a single event, it was a sustained, multi-layered crisis that threatened to destroy the colony entirely. As tensions reached their peak, a particularly devastating assault struck the central hub of the colony. Critical energy systems were destroyed, communication arrays rendered inoperable, and multiple structures were damaged. Casualties were high, and the community faced its most severe test yet. Panic surged through the population as the threat of complete annihilation became a tangible reality. Leaders, engineers, volunteers, and ordinary citizens alike were forced to confront the immediate need to survive, while still attempting to rescue those who had been captured. The decisions were made in split seconds, often with limited information, highlighting the intensity and unpredictability of the situation. The breaking point had arrived, and the colony's fate hung in the balance. It was in these moments of extreme danger that the true character of the colonists began to emerge. Despite fear and exhaustion, acts of extraordinary courage became commonplace. Individuals risked their lives to save others, repair critical infrastructure, and maintain essential systems. Volunteers organized into impromptu defense units, using whatever resources were available to delay or repel attacks. Scientists modified equipment to create makeshift weapons and protective systems. Children and the elderly were guided to the safest zones, often with the assistance of older siblings, friends, or neighbors. Every member of the community contributed in some way, demonstrating the resilience and solidarity that had been cultivated over generations. At the same time, the breaking point highlighted the limits of the colony's capabilities. No matter how brave, resourceful, or determined the colonists were, they could not withstand the relentless pressure of intelligent, adaptive attackers combined with a hostile environment. The realization of this limitation was sobering, yet it reinforced the urgent need for external intervention. Survival depended not only on courage and ingenuity but also on the timely arrival of capable allies forces with the skill, experience, and power to confront the attackers and restore balance. As the day turned to night, the tension in the colony reached an almost unbearable level. Families huddled in shelters, patrols moved cautiously through damaged zones, and leaders made decisions that could determine life or death in moments. The breaking point had transformed the colony into a crucible of fear, courage, and determination. Every decision carried weight, every action could lead to disaster or salvation, and every individual played a role in the ongoing struggle. It was a moment where survival, morality, and strategy intersected in ways that would define the colony for years to come. Amid this chaos, the first signals of the Deathworlders' approach were finally detected. Distant, precise, and unmistakably advanced. These signals offered hope that had been absent for days. The colony, battered but not defeated, prepared for what they hoped would be the arrival of their saviors. While danger remained, the breaking point had also marked a turning point. The community had survived its darkest hour. We maintained its cohesion despite overwhelming pressure, and held on to hope that the intervention of extraordinary allies would soon shift the balance of power. The breaking point was more than a moment of crisis. It was a test of endurance, strategy, courage, and community. The alien colony had faced seemingly insurmountable challenges, from intelligent attackers to a hostile environment and the psychological strain of sustained fear. Yet, through ingenuity, solidarity, and determination, they had held on long enough for the possibility of rescue. The stage was set for a dramatic turning point in the story, where the arrival of the Deathworlders would intersect with the colony's struggle, offering the chance to transform near-certain disaster into a story of survival, heroism, and triumph. The moment the Deathworlders arrived near the alien colony, a profound shift occurred. Their ships, sleek and imposing, cut through the atmosphere with precision, moving in coordinated formations that immediately established dominance in the skies. For the colonists, the sight of these legendary beings was both awe-inspiring and reassuring. Fear and desperation that had weighed heavily for days began to lift, replaced by cautious hope. It was as if the tides of fate were turning, offering a chance to reclaim stability and safety in a situation that had seemed hopeless. The Deathworlders wasted no time. Their approach was calculated, deliberate, and unmistakably focused on the mission to save the alien colony and neutralize the attackers. From the first moments of engagement, it was clear why the Deathworlders were feared and respected throughout the galaxy. Their warriors moved with incredible efficiency and coordination, combining raw physical strength with advanced tactical knowledge. They assessed the environment, identified the enemy's positions, and predicted their likely strategies. Every maneuver was precise, every action purposeful. The attackers, who had grown bold from weeks of overwhelming the colonists, were suddenly forced to confront a level of skill and power far beyond what they had anticipated. Confusion and panic rippled through their ranks as the Deathworlders executed simultaneous strikes, disabling key enemy positions and cutting off escape routes with unerring accuracy. While the Deathworlders handled the attackers, the colonists were able to take action in ways they had not been able to for weeks. Repair teams, who had previously worked under constant threat, now operated with relative security. Engineers restored power grids and communication lines. Medical teams attended to the wounded, and civilians were guided to safe zones. The relief and morale boost provided by the Deathworlders' presence allowed the colonists to act decisively and with purpose. The colony, which had seemed on the brink of collapse, now functioned with renewed energy. The combination of external intervention and internal determination created a synergy that increased the effectiveness of every effort. The Deathworlders also displayed a remarkable understanding of both the environment and the colonists themselves. They quickly adapted to the planet's harsh terrain, navigating treacherous cliffs, sudden floods, and areas inhabited by aggressive wildlife with ease. Their advanced equipment and survival skills allowed them to operate where others might have struggled or failed entirely. Moreover, they took time to assess the needs of the colonists, prioritizing the protection of vulnerable individuals and critical infrastructure. This approach reflected not just tactical brilliance but also a profound moral commitment. They were there to save lives, not merely to defeat an enemy. The turning point in the battle came when the Deathworlders executed a coordinated operation to rescue the colonists who had been captured. These hostages were being held in fortified areas, previously thought inaccessible or heavily defended. Using a combination of stealth, diversion, and brute strength, the Deathworlders penetrated these defenses. Each warrior moved with confidence and precision, neutralizing threats while ensuring the safety of the colonists. The rescued individuals were guided back to secure zones, often carried physically when necessary, demonstrating the Deathworlders' adaptability and determination. The colonists, many of whom had feared for the lives of their friends, family, and colleagues, were overwhelmed with relief and gratitude. This act alone transformed despair into hope, reinforcing the realization that survival was now possible. Meanwhile, the remaining attackers struggled to regroup against an opponent they could not predict or outmaneuver. The Deathworlders' tactical expertise, combined with their superior combat abilities, allowed them to control the battlefield completely. They anticipated the enemy's moves, countered strategies before they could be executed, and exploited weaknesses with unerring accuracy. The attackers, once confident and dominant, were now in disarray, unable to respond effectively. Their morale crumbled as they faced opponents who seemed to anticipate every action, forcing them into retreat or surrender. The contrast between the Deathworlders' efficiency and the attackers' desperation was stark, highlighting the profound impact of skill, preparation, and courage in the resolution of conflict as the battle continued. The colonists began to contribute actively, using their knowledge of the terrain, technology, and infrastructure to assist in the operation. They provided critical information on enemy positions, environmental hazards, and the layout of settlements. Small teams supported the Deathworlders by repairing compromised systems, setting up temporary defenses, and ensuring that vulnerable individuals were safe. This collaboration between the rescuers and the colonists was essential in achieving a swift and decisive resolution. The colonists, once entirely on the defensive, now played an active role in reclaiming their home, illustrating the transformative power of combined effort and shared purpose. The Deathworlders' leadership and organization were equally impressive. Commanders coordinated multiple squads across the colony, ensuring that no area was left vulnerable and that resources were utilized efficiently. Their ability to communicate complex strategies quickly and clearly allowed them to adapt to rapidly changing conditions, neutralize threats, and maintain momentum. Each action, from the smallest tactical maneuver to the overarching operational plan, was executed with precision and foresight. The attackers, overwhelmed by this level of organization, were systematically neutralized. Their ability to resist was gradually eroded, culminating in a complete collapse of their operational structure. Beyond the tactical and physical aspects of the rescue, the Deathworlders also focused on the emotional and psychological well-being of the colonists. They provided guidance, reassurance, and leadership in moments of fear and uncertainty. Their calm, authoritative presence instilled confidence and allowed the colonists to act effectively, even under stress. Witnessing such competent and compassionate intervention reinforced trust, strengthened morale, and fostered a sense of security that had been absent for weeks. The psychological impact of this support was as significant as the physical actions on the battlefield. Once the attackers were neutralized and the captured colonists rescued, the Deathworlders helped stabilize the colony's infrastructure. They worked alongside engineers and technicians to repair power grids, restore communication networks, and secure vulnerable zones. Their advanced technology accelerated processes that would have taken the colonists weeks to accomplish on their own. By the time the immediate threat had been eliminated, much of the colony's operational capability had been restored, allowing normal functions to resume and reducing the risk of further crises. This phase of the resolution was critical, as it ensured that the colony could recover quickly and avoid lingering vulnerabilities that could be exploited in the future. The resolution of the conflict was not simply a matter of victory over the attackers. It was a comprehensive restoration of safety, stability, and hope. The colonists, who had endured days of fear, stress, and near-constant danger, now had the opportunity to breathe, regroup, and begin rebuilding. The Deathworlders had not only defeated the immediate threat, but had also reinforced the colony's capacity to defend itself, taught lessons in strategic thinking and resilience, and demonstrated the importance of courage, preparation, and cooperation. The community could now look forward to recovery, strengthened by the knowledge that formidable allies existed to protect them when needed. The aftermath of the resolution also highlighted the deep bond formed between the Deathworlders and the colonists. Trust, once fragile and cautious, had been solidified through action. The Deathworlders' intervention had proven that their reputation for honor, skill, and loyalty was well-earned. The colonists, who had initially viewed them with a mix of fear and skepticism, now saw them as protectors, mentors, and allies. This relationship would influence future interactions, fostering cooperation, communication, and mutual respect. It was a rare moment in which fear was transformed into gratitude, and despair into hope. In the final stages of the resolution, the Deathworlders oversaw the safe evacuation of any remaining vulnerable individuals from high-risk areas. They implemented temporary protective measures, fortified critical infrastructure, and ensured that essential systems were functioning efficiently. Every detail, no matter how small, was addressed with meticulous care, reflecting their commitment to completing the mission thoroughly and responsibly. The colonists, now empowered and supported, were able to take part in the final stages of recovery, reinforcing the sense of community and shared accomplishment that had developed during the operation. By the time the immediate crisis had passed, the alien colony had been transformed. What had once been a desperate, beleaguered population now stood resilient, safe, and prepared to rebuild. The attackers had been neutralized, critical systems restored, and the psychological strain alleviated by the visible presence and support of the Deathworlders. The resolution was comprehensive, addressing not only the physical dangers but also the emotional and societal challenges that had accompanied weeks of siege and uncertainty. The resolution also served as a testament to the effectiveness of collaboration between the Deathworlders and the colonists. Each group brought unique strengths. The Deathworlders with their combat skills, strategic expertise, and survival knowledge. The colonists with their intimate understanding of the environment, technology, and community needs. Together, they were able to overcome a situation that neither could have managed alone. This partnership reinforced the idea that even in the most desperate circumstances, cooperation, planning, and courage can achieve remarkable outcomes in the final moments of the operation. The colonists gathered to witness the departure of the Deathworlders. Though their mission was complete, their presence had left an indelible mark. Families, leaders, and volunteers alike expressed gratitude, relief, and admiration for the beings who had risked everything to save them. The colonists' sense of vulnerability had been replaced with confidence, their fear tempered by experience, and their hope renewed by the demonstration of courage and loyalty. The Deathworlders, for their part, departed quietly, leaving the colony to its recovery but taking with them the satisfaction of a mission accomplished with honor, precision, and humanity. The resolution of this conflict marked not just the end of immediate danger but also the beginning of a new chapter for the alien colony. The lessons learned, the bonds formed, and the confidence gained would influence their society for generations. They had witnessed firsthand the power of skill, courage, and strategic thinking, and they had experienced the transformative impact of allies who acted not out of obligation but out of commitment to justice and survival. The resolution was complete in every sense. Lives were saved, threats neutralized, and a society that had teetered on the brink of collapse had been restored to a position of strength, safety, and hope. After the chaos of battle had ended and the attackers had been fully neutralized, the alien colony entered a period of recovery and reflection that was unlike anything they had ever experienced. For weeks they had been living under constant threat, their lives dictated by fear, exhaustion, and uncertainty. Every day had been a test of survival, every decision a delicate balance between risk and necessity. Now, as the immediate danger had passed, the colonists were confronted with the reality of the aftermath, a combination of relief, grief, gratitude, and a profound understanding of their own vulnerability. The first days following the resolution were marked by a mixture of emotions: relief at having survived, sorrow for those who had suffered or been lost, and a deep sense of respect for the Deathworlders who had intervened so decisively. The physical damage to the colony was extensive. Settlements had been partially destroyed, power grids were still stabilizing, and communication arrays had suffered repeated sabotage. Many areas of the planet were scarred from the attacks, with burned vegetation, cratered landscapes, and temporary fortifications erected by both colonists and Deathworlders to repel the invaders. The engineers and repair teams worked tirelessly to restore essential functions, often under extreme conditions, but the presence of the Deathworlders had accelerated the process. Their knowledge, advanced technology, and strategic guidance allowed repairs to happen faster and more efficiently than the colonists could have imagined. Even so, it was clear that full recovery would take time, and patience became an essential part of the colony's new reality. In addition to physical restoration, the colony had to address the emotional and psychological consequences of the conflict. Individuals who had faced life-threatening danger, witnessed destruction, or lost friends and family members experienced a range of reactions, including fear, anger, guilt, and trauma. The Deathworlders, understanding the importance of emotional recovery, stayed briefly to offer guidance and support, helping the colonists process the events and understand the value of their survival. Group meetings, personal counseling, and structured routines were established to help people regain a sense of normalcy. Community leaders emphasized the importance of resilience, cooperation, and shared responsibility, encouraging colonists to rebuild not only structures but also trust and morale. One of the most profound reflections during this period was the realization of the colony's vulnerability. Before the attacks, the colonists had believed that their intelligence, technological skill, and careful planning were enough to ensure safety. Yet, weeks of relentless assault demonstrated that knowledge alone was insufficient without preparation for unpredictable threats and adaptive enemies. The experience taught them that survival required not only intellect but also practical skill, flexibility, and a willingness to seek help when necessary. The lessons were harsh but invaluable, shaping the colony's approach to future challenges. A newfound respect for caution, strategic planning, and external alliances became a central theme in their reflections. Another significant outcome of the aftermath was the deep appreciation for the Death. The colonists had heard tales of their strength, resilience, and tactical genius, but seeing it firsthand left an indelible impression. The Deathworlders had not only defeated the attackers with precision and efficiency, but had also preserved life, minimized unnecessary harm, and demonstrated empathy for the colonists' plight. Their intervention went beyond mere combat. It was an example of strategic brilliance combined with moral responsibility. The colonists began to recognize the importance of allies who acted not only out of capability but out of commitment to justice, protection, and mutual respect. This awareness reshaped the colony's perspective on interstellar relationships, diplomacy, and the value of cultivating partnerships with other civilizations. As the days passed, the community slowly began to rebuild routine life. Children returned to education programs within secure zones, scientists resumed research projects, and engineers worked to improve infrastructure and implement new safety measures. The experience of crisis had changed the way every member of the colony approached their roles. Tasks that were once mundane now carried new significance, as every action contributed to the stability, security, and resilience of the community. Individuals were more aware of the potential consequences of oversight, and collaboration became a key principle in decision. The colony had learned that survival was a collective effort, and every member, from the youngest to the oldest, had a responsibility to contribute. The social fabric of the colony also evolved during this period. The shared experience of facing extreme danger had fostered stronger bonds among individuals, families, and community groups. Trust, which had been tested under the stress of siege and internal conflict, was reinforced through acts of courage, collaboration, and empathy. Stories of bravery, sacrifice, and ingenuity circulated widely, serving both as inspiration and as practical lessons for future preparedness. The collective memory of the conflict became a source of identity for the colony, reminding them of both their vulnerability and their resilience. This strengthened social cohesion and laid the foundation for a more united, capable, and confident community. Reflection also led the colonists to reassess their approach to defense and security. They had relied heavily on technology, fortifications, and theoretical strategies, but the conflict demonstrated the limitations of these methods when faced with a skilled and adaptive enemy. New defensive protocols were developed, incorporating lessons learned from both the attacker's strategies and the Deathworlders' techniques. Contingency plans, early warning systems, and rapid response strategies were refined to ensure that future threats could be detected, assessed, and neutralized more effectively. Training programs were expanded to prepare both leaders and civilians for crisis situations, emphasizing adaptability, quick decision-making, and cooperation under stress. The colony emerged more resilient and prepared for potential future dangers at the same time. The colonists took time to honor and remember those affected by the conflict. Monuments were constructed, memorial ceremonies held, and stories of sacrifice recorded for future generations. The deaths, injuries, and hardships endured during the attacks became part of the colony's collective memory, serving as both a tribute and a lesson. Through these acts of remembrance, the community found closure, acknowledging the human cost of survival while celebrating the courage and perseverance that had allowed them to endure. These rituals also reinforced the importance of shared history and identity, helping the colonists heal emotionally and culturally. The reflection extended beyond immediate survival and recovery. The colony began to consider its place in the broader universe. Before the attacks, their focus had been largely internal on research, exploration, and the development of technology and infrastructure. The events had forced them to recognize the interconnectedness of civilizations, the importance of allies, and the unpredictable nature of threats beyond their world. The Deathworlders' intervention highlighted the value of interstellar cooperation and the benefits of forming strategic relationships with other capable species. Plans were initiated to maintain communication networks, strengthen alliances, and ensure that the colony would never again face such a crisis entirely alone. Technological innovation also became a key focus during the aftermath. The colonists studied the advanced equipment, strategies, and techniques used by the Deathworlders, seeking to adapt them to their own systems. Energy grids were upgraded to be more resilient, communication networks hardened against disruption, and defensive systems enhanced for adaptability. Scientific research prioritized survival-oriented technology, environmental monitoring, and strategic planning tools. The combination of experiential knowledge gained during the conflict and the study of the Deathworlders' technology positioned the colony to be stronger, more capable, and more secure than ever before. Emotionally, the colonists experienced a profound shift in perspective. The conflict had revealed both the fragility and the resilience of life, the unpredictability of threats, and the power of courage and cooperation. Individuals became more aware of their own strengths and limitations, more appreciative of the contributions of others, and more committed to shared goals. Gratitude toward allies, appreciation for life, and recognition of the importance of community became guiding principles in both personal and societal development. The reflection period allowed the colonists to internalize these lessons, ensuring that the experience would shape their culture, values, and priorities for generations. In the final stages of aftermath and reflection, the colony turned its attention to long-term planning. Rebuilding was not merely about restoring what had been lost. It was about creating a society capable of thriving despite future challenges. Strategic initiatives were launched to diversify energy sources, improve agricultural sustainability, expand defensive capabilities, and ensure robust communication channels. Education programs incorporated lessons from the conflict, teaching future generations the importance of resilience, adaptability, and strategic thinking. Leadership structures were adjusted to encourage collaboration, rapid decision-making, and clear communication. The colony emerged from the ordeal not just intact, but wiser, stronger, and more cohesive than it had ever been. The presence and departure of the Deathworlders left an enduring legacy. Beyond the immediate victory, the intervention demonstrated the value of courage, skill, and moral responsibility. The colonists were inspired to adopt similar principles in their own society, emphasizing preparedness, teamwork, and a commitment to protecting others. Stories of the Deathworlders' bravery became foundational myths for the colony, blending admiration with practical lessons on strategy, resilience, and ethical action. The memory of their interventions served as a constant reminder that even in the darkest times, help could arrive, courage could triumph, and survival was possible with determination, intelligence, and cooperation. Ultimately, the aftermath and reflection marked a period of transformation. The alien colony, once fragile and vulnerable, had faced extraordinary danger, survived near total destruction, and emerged stronger, wiser, and more unified. They had learned hard lessons about vulnerability, resilience, cooperation, and the unpredictable nature of threats. They had experienced fear, loss, hope, and triumph, and they had seen firsthand the impact of skill, courage, and moral action in shaping outcomes. Through this process, the colony not only recovered physically and emotionally but also developed a lasting sense of identity, purpose, and preparedness that would guide them in all future endeavors. The events became a defining chapter in the colony's history. Future generations would remember the siege, the bravery of their ancestors, and the heroic intervention of the Death. They would study the conflict, draw lessons from it, and build upon the resilience and knowledge gained during those harrowing weeks. The colony had endured its greatest challenge, and in doing so, had transformed itself from a society vulnerable to external threats into one capable of facing the future with confidence, unity, and hope. In reflection, the colonists recognized that survival was not merely about intelligence or technology. It was about courage, cooperation, and the willingness to act in the service of others.